one of the things that I really like to do on trail is stop and bring a good book, and I'll sit in a really pretty spot and I'll stay there for an hour and, eat my baguette and eat my cheese and read my book and then move on. Because I think you also have to separate yourself a little bit from the hiking mentality of, I'm just going to get to my destination. In my books, hiking is not meant really as a form of exercise. It's meant as a way of travel. So the trail brings you to these things that you then want to slow down and explore and really take in.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're joined by Cassandra Overby, writer, adventurer, and passionate advocate for slowing down and connecting deeply with the outdoors. Cassandra is the author of Home Base Hiking Europe, a book that reimagines what travel can look like. Instead of racing across countries or ticking off famous routes, Cassandra invites us to choose a single home base, a village, a valley, a corner of Europe, and explore from there, one trail and one connection at a time. Hi, Cassandra. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I love the idea behind this book. It's something that I've discovered on my own. I wish this book was around 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I tried to do what everybody does and rush around and see everything. But before we talk about the book, I want to talk a little bit more about your experience. You've built a life around exploring long distance trails in Europe, as well as now this idea of focusing on home bases. But can you talk about the spark that first drew you into the world of walking?
Yes, so actually, my big European walking story starts with a big travel breakup. So if we go back about 15 years ago, I was in my mid 20s and I was the consummate traveler. I loved going everywhere. I'd lived in Europe at that point. I'd gone to Haiti. I just saved up for a big trip around the world and I was in Guatemala. And 3 months into my trip, I decided to just keep everything that was left in my bank account and move back home to Washington, which I never thought that I would ever do. And at first, I really couldn't figure it out. And then it dawned on me that I was just tired of seeing things. It felt like there wasn't any value in just looking at the world. It didn't feel fulfilling. And so I went home. A couple years later, after I got an office job, bought a car, all that stuff, I ended up meeting the guy who I would marry. And when we first met, he told me his big dream was traveling. So I gave him a lot of advice, and I didn't really expect that he would invite me on his big dream, which was a grand tour of Europe. So I had a lot of thinking to do about this because I had gone through this big travel breakup and I was really content with being at home and having a different kind of life. Well, I decided to go with him. We were planning on about 5 months at the time. And because I had had this big breakup with travel, I decided that we needed to do things very different than I had done them in the past. Instead of bouncing around, seeing as much as we could see, I really wanted to stop and do hikes and walks wherever we were, because that was kind of the thing that grounded me. It was my way of just enjoying life, relaxing. And so we started peppering in these walks on our grand tour of Europe. And pretty soon we started taking longer walks and longer walks, and we were doing multi day hikes. And then I had this grand epiphany that hiking in Europe wasn't taking a break from travel. It was actually a better way to travel. And that changed everything. It set in motion my first book. It changed who I am as a traveler. And it led to everything that came from that.
And so why do you feel hiking's a better way to travel?
So when you're hiking, especially in Europe, it's a pretty fail-proof way to get yourself into small towns that are small enough to feel local, where people listen to local music, speak the local language, listen to local music, eat local food. If you go somewhere big like Paris, you'll get some French culture, but really you're in a very international destination and you can get Chinese food and you can get Indian food and it feels global. But when you're hiking and you get into these small little villages, they're big enough to have services. So they'll have restaurants and inns where you can stay. And you'll be able to meet people, and you'll also have the best of natural beauty at your fingertips because the trails are thoughtfully designed, oftentimes to go from villages right out into nature and then back to either the same village or different villages. So you're getting really incredible nature. You're getting kind of the best kind of small town for when you're walking and when you're traveling.
Your book, Home Base Hiking Europe, is central aspect of it is just find one place and explore one place at a time. Can you talk about how you came up with this theory?
So I love village to village and hut to hut hiking, and that was what my first book was all about. And when I had kids, it became quickly apparent when I tried to still do this kind of travel that it was beyond what my family was capable of. And the only way that I could still explore Europe on foot was by doing it differently. And I knew that that would apply for a lot of other people as well. So I came up with this idea of staying in one spot and selecting really amazing hikes from that spot. And it would eliminate a lot of the logistics. There was only one place to reserve instead of a place every single night. We wouldn't have to worry about either lugging all the kids' stuff along with us or finding luggage transfer to get the cribs and everything else where we were staying. And it would give us a lot of flexibility. So, if it rained one day, we could kind of swap a different hike in that was shorter or that had more tree coverage. Or we could do something inside and save the day that we were going to be sightseeing for an outdoor day. So, for a young family, it really was a perfect way to travel. And that goes also for people who, are older, maybe who like more creature comforts. You could certainly get a lot more creature comforts when you're staying in a village as opposed to like a series of mountain huts. But the thing that I didn't really expect, but that I found out once I started doing this was that by doing these hikes and staying in one spot, we gained such a deeper appreciation for local culture. And we got to make connections that, had we just been passing through, we never would have made. So, there's the consummate experience of like you find that restaurant that you really love in a town and you think to yourself, man, I want to go back here every day. Well, we did. We found that spot and we did go back every night for dinner because we loved it so much. We got to know the owner and his family, and his kids would come out and play with our kids every time he showed up. And, looking at the menu, we saw all of these farms listed where different items were from. And when we were walking, we would walk through those farms. And it was just such an amazing way to really feel like we were temporary locals, that we weren't just passing through.
I'm interested in kind of the value you can get while doing one of these home-based stays. Before we start talking, I mentioned how this summer we did basically this type of trip, but we bookended it at the start in London, at the end in Paris, and just the disparity of prices in a week in the French or Swiss Alps versus a week in Paris and London it was like a third the cost. It was just wild. That's just, one little part of the world. Is that what you found all over Europe, that you can just have great value staying in chalets that are suitable for a family in these maybe less touristy areas?
Yes, absolutely. So staying in these small towns, especially if you choose something like an apartment, that's what we stay in most of the time now that we have kids. You can find such great value. And, you really are spending probably a third, sometimes even less than what you would spend in a larger spot. And so you can get, a really comfortable apartment that's not fancy by any means for sometimes like $100 a night or even a little less. And now, if you want to take your family, on a little jaunt into the hillsides and do like one overnight or two overnights in a mountain hut, then it gets even cheaper. So that's kind of what we like to do to mix the two concepts is we like to stay in an apartment when we're in the villages, and then we'll go out for one or two nights to the mountain huts, still store our stuff in town, and then it can be like 20 or $30 per person.
In a period of everyone's rushing to see everything, and I'm just always amazed by how many people are just going to places to recreate uh, photos they saw on Instagram. What you're extolling in Explore Europe on foot and then with this home base hiking book is almost the opposite kind of travel. It's not about getting that one great photo. It's about slowing down and kind of just becoming a part of the place you're in. Why do you think slow travel is not catching on maybe as much as other types of, this Instagram travel trend.
I was on trail all summer and I did see a lot of hikes that were kind of blown out by this Instagram travel trend. And in just the spots where the photos were taken, you had a whole lot of people. And then just up the trail from that spot, you would have an even prettier spot and nobody there. And it was really amazing to see that difference. Um, so I think slow travel maybe isn't as popular right now with Instagram travel because people don't have a way to share it as much, right? Like, you don't just post your slow travel experience and allow other people to really soak that in and want to duplicate it. But I think there are so many people out there who are after slow travel. And I think, especially, there's this culture in Europe of slow travel. I mean, people just consider themselves to be walkers. And when you get over there and you soak in that culture, it's easy to make that part of your life as well. And I think there are so many rewards. It's cheaper to travel in a slow way, it's more authentic. One of the things that I really like to do on trail is stop and bring a good book, and I'll sit in a really pretty spot and I'll stay there for an hour and, eat my baguette and eat my cheese and read my book and then move on. Because I think you also have to separate yourself a little bit from the hiking mentality of, I'm just going to get to my destination. In my books, hiking is not meant really as a form of exercise. It's meant as a way of travel. So the trail brings you to these things that you then want to slow down and explore and really take in.
For your book, Home Base Hiking Europe, you've profiled 10 destinations. And I'm wondering, how did you choose those 10 specifically?
I start with a lot of research. So I spend months looking into, magazine articles about best places to hike in Europe. I talk to my European hiking buddies and see what's on their radar. I look in so many different places to first start with this big list of, everywhere that would be good for the book. And then I tried to drill down into what kind of spots have a variety of experiences. So, if you're staying in a home base, you don't want to see four views or, do four hikes around the exact same thing or feel like you're kind of repeating yourself every day. You want to see four totally different facets of local life and local landscape. So I look for places that can showcase, water, mountains, historical elements. And then I also try to look for places that are local hotspots, not global hotspots. That's really important to me. So an example is Costa Brava in Spain. One of the top reasons that made the list was, when you go there, it's basically all Spanish people. It's Spanish people, some who live there as their primary home, others it's their secondary residence and they live in Barcelona. But when you go down the street, you hear Spanish. And there's not a lot of international tourism there. And so, yes, it's a place that's set up with ice cream stands and great restaurants and all of the services you could ever want as a traveler, but you're not feeling like you're just one of the masses. You still feel like you're actually traveling. And so those are the kinds of places that I like to profile. So I try to look for an area that has a lot of really great things to offer and then kind of look one step off that to find the places that the locals would go instead of all of the tourists.
And for each of the regions in the book, you suggest towns to stay in. For you, what makes a great town to be a home base?
So a great town to be home base is one that is big enough to offer the services that you want as a traveler, restaurants, cafes, little interesting museums, spots that you want to visit in ways that you can get your day to day needs met. But that also isn't so big. So, you want somewhere where you can actually feel the pulse of daily life, where you see people get up and go to work and, you see the flow of people in the cafes and it's much different from a big city. So, I like to look for these smaller spots, but ones that are not too small, because if you go too small, then you don't have the services that you really want as a traveler.
Let's dig into the 10 destinations in your book. And I'm interested why you chose these destinations. So maybe you can give an elevator pitch about each of the destinations and try and convince listeners why this should be a place they consider for their next holiday. And we'll just go chapter by chapter. So number one is Dolomites. Obviously a wonderful place. Talk about why this is a great destination for a home base.
So, when I was out doing book talks for my first book, Explore Europe on Foot, at almost every single book talk, people would say, "What about the Dolomites? What about the Dolomites? It's not in here." And so finally I thought, okay, you know what? That has to be on the list for the next book. And so I went to the Dolomites and I could see exactly why everybody was so wild about it. I mean, you have these incredibly beautiful, jagged rocks. You have a whole bunch of gondolas and great public transportation to get you up to the level of the mountains so that, it really decreases the effort that it takes to get those good views. There were so many huts and so many villages that were kid friendly, which was really important for us. And, it was really affordable. So, in some ways, it felt a lot like Switzerland, like really big views for very little effort, really, when it came to it. And yet, so much more affordable.
And are there some towns there that you really think make great bases?
Yeah, so the place that I really like to stay is Val Gardena, and it's a valley that has a series of 3 villages in there. I really like to stay in Santa Cristina, which is the middle one. But each little village has its own flavor, and the other ones make good home bases too. But it's very different from the bigger, more famous towns in the Dolomites because, you have a lot of wood carvers in these villages. And so you have shops where they're selling their wood carvings, and everything just is a lot more local. And so it doesn't feel overblown like a lot of the Dolomites has started to feel because the popularity has started to catch on. It still feels like a spot where there aren't a crazy amount of people.
The next region is one that surprised me, the Somme region of France. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I really like to showcase areas that have history and that are very historically significant. And the Somme was that. So there's a lot of World War I history there. You can go and visit the battlefields and the memorials. And then you can actually see, part of the French coast that not a lot of people go to. And so it's this wonderfully peaceful place with pretty flat walks. And another thing that's really cool about the area is the very distinct blend of British and French culture. So you have a lot of restaurants that have sprung up that serve British fare. And that's because so many British people come and go to the memorials. It was a place of many, many, many losses for Britain during World War I. So you get a lot of the people checking in on their relatives and seeing where their families came from, and it's just a really beautiful spot. When you hike around there, it's almost hard to imagine that it was ever this bloody place because now you have gorgeous, peaceful rivers. You can walk through woods where previously there were snipers. And it's really easy to kind of get taken away by your imagination and see what life was like all these years ago. I mean, you can see bullet holes in trees, and it's a totally different kind of experience than we have with hiking in the United States, which I love.
And, having done these types of trips with my kids, being able for them to actually like see where World War I happened, see the trenches and like really like live the history. Like my kids just became enamored with wanting to like try and find books and learn about what happened. And when history can come alive, it's like super satisfying as a parent to see kids like really trying to dig in and understand what they're seeing and why, which they can't do sitting at home in the backyard.
Right. It's like a real world education. And these places, especially like the Somme that have so much history, it offers story, and kids love story. And so it's a really easy way to bring them in and help them love traveling and to see the world in a different way.
Next place you profile is Costa Brava, which I've had friends go there for a beach holiday, but it's interesting it's on your list. Can you talk about how this part of Spain is such a great location for a home base hiking holiday?
Yeah, so Costa Brava is only a couple of hours from Barcelona. So, there's a big city that you can explore if you want, but then these 2 hours away, you have these former fishing villages that are set along the water, and you can walk from little village to little village. And along the way, you have these beautiful lighthouses. And Salvador Dali lived there. You can go and visit the house where he lived, which is very quirky. And there's some of the best coastal hiking in the whole world. So the trails there, they used to be run by border guards who were trying to make sure there were no smugglers coming in. But nowadays, those trails have been recognized by even National Geographic as the best in the world. And you have fresh fish to eat when you're done hiking. You have a lot of the lighthouses serving, wine and different things from the region. And it's such a special spot. It's actually where a lot of billionaires quietly choose to make their home. So, like people who could go anywhere choose to quietly live in Costa Brava.
Number 4 is the beautiful region of Provence in France, which still, 25 years after I spent a couple weeks there, still is a place where just one of my best vacations ever. So I'm really happy this is in Provence, but maybe tell the listeners what makes it so special.
One of the things that I love about Provence is that people go and they drive to the different hill town spots and they don't really see anything that's in between because they're looking at their map or they're talking. But when you slow down and you walk, you realize that the land in between these hilltop villages is even more gorgeous than the hilltop villages themselves. You have these beautiful fields, you have gorgeous woods. It's a great place to also bike. So you have a lot of fresh produce, really good meals. It's good for foodies. And then also you can stay in some places that are hundreds of years old. Like we stayed in a house that was built out of stone and it used to be a tannery. And there was a spot that was kind of graded over. And when you looked down, there was a hole that went down, down, down. And that was where they had all the tannery chemicals back in like the 1400s. And so it's a place that just is alive with history. But I like the walking because it's often overlooked by people who are doing bus tours and who are just moving quickly.
And what are the villages you like in Provence? Because there's so many great ones, and, I'm hoping you have something a place I haven't heard of that I can put on my list for a future trip.
I like to stay in Gourd, and Roussillon is another good option. If people haven't seen pictures of Roussillon, it's bright orange because of the ochre that's in the soil. And it looks just like a painting. But gourd is nice. The one thing I recommend for gourd is that people try to stay on the top of the hill unless they really like climbing hills, because we stayed on a place that was like halfway down the hill, and every time we wanted to go into town, it was a huge hike up and then a huge hike down, and so that was pretty funny.
Number 5 is Lake Bohinj or Lake Bohinj. I never know how to say it in Slovenia, which Slovenia is one of the fastest growing tourism hotspots in Europe. But it's still kind of undiscovered because it's just starting its ascendancy. But can you talk a little bit about this region?
Yeah, so Lake Bohinj is nice because, as I mentioned about the spots that I like to choose, it's one stop away from a lake that's a lot more visited, and that is Lake Bled. So if you go to Lake Bled, it's gorgeous. You have the church and island in the center of the lake and everything, but there are so many people, it just doesn't feel authentic anymore. Well, Lake Bohinj is completely authentic, and it's right at the base of Triglav National Park. And so you have walks around the lake that are really beautiful. You can walk in the national park and do some hut walking. And it's a place that is actually frequented by a lot of Eastern Europeans. And it's not very expensive at all. And so that was one of the cheapest places that we've stayed. And the Alps are still really, really beautiful. It's just that most Americans, I would say, don't know about it.
Number 6 is the Jungfrau. Sorry, I almost said it the wrong way. The Jungfrau region in Switzerland. Uh, Tell me what makes this region so popular and onto your list.
So the Jungfrau region of Switzerland is one of my absolute favorites. You get such huge views of the mountains and when you think of Sound of Music kind of landscape and that's what you're going to get in Switzerland. And so there's a trail that actually goes from east to west across Switzerland, and it's called the Swiss Alpine Pass Route. And it's one of my favorites. And pretty much the prettiest spot on that route is in the Jungfrau region. And so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to stay there in home base. And it's a really great spot, especially for people who have creaking knees or kids, or for some reason, don't want to do a lot of elevation gain, because you can take gondolas and trains up to the really good spots, hike at altitude, and then even take a lot of gondolas all the way back down. So you don't have to do a lot of elevation gain or loss, but you have probably the most incredible views of the mountains that you'll ever have.
Number 7 is the Piedmont region of Italy. Can you maybe share what you like about this region? And again, I'd love to have a few suggestions on towns to be based in.
Yeah, so with the Piedmont, I was really looking for a wine area in Italy, but Tuscany has become so popular. I didn't want to send people there. And so when I was looking, I came across the Piedmont, and they have really amazing wines that are produced from that area. And the thing that I liked too was that when I went, it felt so small and local. Like you would be walking down the street, and all of a sudden, these big tractors that just came out of the fields would drive by. And when you're walking in the vineyards, you see people working the vines, and you can go to these community cantinas where you can actually taste all of the wines that are produced locally at a really reasonable price. Um, there are also, different vineyards that you can visit and do actual tastings at, and it's a really small place that not a lot of people go, but the wine and the walking are really amazing.
And are there certain towns or villages that are great bases for people considering going to Piedmont?
Yes, the place that I really like to stay when I'm in the Piedmont is Lamora, and it's a little hilltop village, and all around it are vineyards. But there are lots of little towns in the area around there where you can visit and kind of do some little village to village walking. But I think Lamora is the quietest and the the most authentic of them.
We're 3 away from completing the top 10. Number 8 is Croatia's Dalmatia region. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really like Croatia because people are always asking me about good shoulder season destinations. So if they want to go to Europe and not go in the mad crush of summer, if you want to go in, say, May or June or even October, Croatia is a great spot to go because you can get these beautiful views. You can have island walking, you can walk in some really beautiful urban parks in Split, which is where I recommend staying, and then you can also do some mountain hiking from there. So it's a very rocky coast, and there are great mountain hikes as well.
Number 9 is a place I've never been to, Berchtesgaden National Park in Germany. I'm interested to know what makes this such a great place for a home base.
I really love Berchtesgaden National Park because it feels very, very typically Bavarian. So it is a national park town, which I also really like. Like when you walk around town, you see people in their boots, their lederhosen, they've got their hiking backpacks on. Everybody is there to enjoy the beautiful walks that are around town. And pretty much everybody is German. And so it's just my kind of spot. And the buildings are painted with these gorgeous murals, and they have a lot of cultural stuff on tap too. So you can learn about World War II history and see where Hitler had his eagle's nest. You can go to the local hometown night on Fridays at the local brewery, and they put on a dance performance of typical dancing, and then they'll bring people out into that. And so you can actually learn how to do German dancing. So it's a great spot where you can blend a lot of history and a lot of very moderate and almost easy walks.
And the final home base location is the Wachau Valley in Austria. Can you maybe give us an overview on why that is such a great place for a home base?
Lots of people know the Danube River Valley because of river cruising. But when people river cruise, they actually miss getting into the vineyards and seeing the beautiful river from a different vantage point. And so they have these sweet little towns along the river. I like to stay in Dernstein and walk from there. But you can go between these villages, which almost no one does because everybody is on a river cruise. So you get some of these spots that can get very busy during the day as the cruise travelers come in, and then you get them at a time when nobody else is there, and even the spots in between where nobody goes. But there are beautiful vineyards that you can walk between. There are really nice monasteries in the area and some really beautiful farmland too that you can walk through.
For people who have maybe never done a trip like this and they're used to the sufferfest of changing hotels every day and going from dawn till dusk, can you maybe share the benefits that your family has experienced from doing trips like these? I'm not thinking just, the conventional, it's easier, it saves money, but does kind of the outcome of travel change when you do a home-based trip over a traditional type of holiday?
So for our family, it's made a really big difference. I took my two kids who are 5 and 7 for 3 months this summer to do all of the research for the two books that I'm writing now, which are also home based books. And getting to see how they interacted when we stayed in a village was really cool because, kids are so good at finding people and being people magnets, and they help us connect as travelers in a way that we couldn't just as adults. And so we would find the local parks and they would get to know other kids. And sometimes the kids spoke a little bit of English, sometimes they didn't. My girls spoke their couple phrases of German, for example, in Austria, but they would jump right in and they would make friends. And they were people that sometimes we would exchange numbers with on WhatsApp, and we would, talk to their parents, and we would meet up again at the playground the next day. And we actually had real relationships. Like we got to know locals. We got to ask them all of our questions that we had about funny local customs and where to go for dinner that had really, really good traditional food, but that nobody really knew about. And so it was a really great way to feel like we were part of the community for a little bit. And that's beyond all of the things, including it being cheaper and all of that. I mean, it was the personal connection that was the big difference for us with home base hiking.
And I think, one question just on some of like the basics of doing a home base. How long do you like to stay in each location? Do you rent a car? Do you try and use local transport? For people that are thinking of doing this, how would you suggest they proceed on those two issues?
A lot of times, because our family is going between many destinations, we lease a car, which is great for long term travel. But I like to recommend that people do what we do when we get to a spot, which is use public transportation, because that's where you're going to have really good conversations with people, is when you're on the bus, or when you're on the train. And so we like to just get to a spot, use the public transportation that's available there. Or, we spend a lot of our time walking from spot to spot because that's the prettiest way to get there. And who cares if it takes us a long time because we get to discover cool things along the way. And then I always kind of have a checklist. Like when I get into our village, the very first thing that I do is find a good grocery store because, sometimes it can be challenging in Europe to find a big enough one with a good amount of selection. So, find a good grocery store, find a really good cafe where you want to post up. And from there, I would say talk to your hosts and find out their best recommendations for where to go eat and where to go see because they have really good suggestions based on other people who have stayed with them and what they know is off the normal tourist radar. So when we were in Sestri Levante in Italy this summer, our hosts took us out for coffee and they gave me intel on all of the different hikes that we wanted to do because they were avid hikers. And they would say, "Oh, yeah, this is what I love about that one," or "I would switch and do this one instead." And so it was really cool hearing their input and forming that relationship with them. So I would say, as much as you can, form a relationship with whoever owns your accommodations, whether it's an Airbnb property or an inn that's run by a local family. That's probably your best source of information for that spot.
You've done so much hiking in Europe, whether going hut to hut or on these long distance routes, but also now doing these home based stays. Do you feel spending this much time hiking in Europe has changed you? And if so, how?
Well, I think in a way hiking in Europe is a bit of a drug. Like you get some of it and it's so wonderful that you just want to do it more and more and more. And for me, it has completely changed the way that I travel. Now, if I try to go somewhere and I'm just into museums or doing more typical sightseeing, one, I feel really lazy because I'm used to hiking a lot. And two, it just feels less fulfilling. And, but in a way, like hiking Europe has really changed my whole life because even when I'm home, I work so much more hiking into my daily life because I found that it just lights me up. It's the thing that I love to do. And so I can't travel all the time. Sometimes I have to be home. And so when I'm at home, I try to make my home life as much like that as I can with the hiking and the daily cappuccino and all of the other things that I love about Europe.
Yeah, those cappuccinos in Italy are so good and they're so
Oh,
cheap. You'll pay
so cheap.
like, what is it? Like €1.50 for like an exquisite cappuccino. And then as soon as you leave Italy, I know this summer we were going over the Great St. Bernard Pass. And as soon as you're into Switzerland, the cappuccinos are not good and they're €5 or €6. And
Right. They get
it's
so
wild. The
expensive.
Italians have figured out the whole coffee aspect, and it's like one of the joys of finding your little cafe, your little bar that you get your cappuccinos every morning, or get a lemon water in the afternoon. It just is such a nice thing. And if you're there for a few days or like a week or two, then it becomes you start to know the people there. They start to know you and your family. It's such a nice experience that you can't really recreate at home, can you?
No. Oh, the cafes there are just wonderful, and all the groups of little old ladies who come and talk to each other and little old men and, getting sometimes that opportunity to strike up a conversation with them and, oh, man, and the coffee is just so good, and everybody has their opinion on, the very best coffee spot, and they will tell you where they think the coffee is not good because they want you to stay away from that spot.
Cassandra, it's been great having you come on the show today. It's been great hearing about all these destinations. And I'm somebody I feel like as a society, we are over loving certain destinations almost to death. And to hear about these destinations where I know, as you say, there's almost no tourists there or just local tourists, it's such a great opportunity to try something new as well as be amazed because these other destinations, they're all great as well. Just because you haven't heard of them doesn't mean they aren't great. So thanks for giving an overview on these 10 destinations and for sharing all your expertise on the show today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, if people want to learn more about your book or about you, where can they find you?
So I have a great website, exploreonfoot.com, and my books are on there. Some of my other opportunities, like I do trip consultations, those are on there as well. And it's also a great way to reach out to me with my email address.
And once again, the book is right here. Home base hiking Europe. It is fantastic. If you've never done a trip like this, or you just want to be inspired for next summer, pick it up, buy it for a loved one as a Christmas present, and it'll be fun. You can pick your next holiday for 2026. And with that, thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.